The truth behind antitrust. The basic theory behind antitrust is that sometimes companies can collude to prevent competition from working its magic, especially if you have a few powerful interests. Rather than competition working to keep prices down and quality high, firms can form cartels or monopolies, engage in otherwise collusive or anti-competitive behavior. The late 19th century saw the rise of the trusts, efforts to monopolize various industries through mergers or buying out the competition. Ultimately, these efforts were in vain. When the trust combinations managed to charge higher prices, this simply attracted new competitors, and prices fell an average of 2.5% across the board between the 1870s and the 1890s. Prices in the industries that the trust controlled fell even further. While economies of scale do justify certain mergers, bigger is not always better, and reverse economies of scales can exist as well, with smaller competitors being able to outcompete bigger companies. For example, in 1907, U.S. Steel, with 63% market share, uh, were faced with falling profits and prices. And and the chairman, Albert Gary, tried to make a gentleman's agreement with other large steel producers that they would limit their production and keep their price high. But what happened was, even though they controlled so much of the steel industry, when they tried this, the smaller independent firms they only had a few percent of the market share, but they would just undercut them and start taking their business away, and so the larger firms had no choice but to follow suit or lose the game entirely. As a reaction to the rise of the trusts, the Sherman anti the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed, prohibiting collusion in restraint of trade. But the very trusts which the act targeted had actually increased output and brought down prices in the industries where they operated relative to the economy as a whole. Additionally, the Sherman Act was something of a dead letter, and there's a reason to believe the whole thing was passed simply to distract the public away from the passage of what the New York Times called the Campaign Contributors Tariff Bill, which Sherman, then chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, sponsored 3 months later. By passing antitrust, Republicans could position themselves as opponents of big business, even while passing high tariffs that would benefit domestic industry.